One. Excellent. All right. Hello and welcome to the Sierra Speaker Series brought to you by California State Parks and the Sierra State Parks Foundation. My name is Jeremy Lin and I'm the California State Park Interpreter based at Donner Memorial State Park. The Sierra Speaker Series shares and connects the rich cultural and natural history of the area to the community. Please donate to the Sierra State Parks Foundation today to support the interpretation, restoration, and preservation of the park system in the Lake Tahoe Donner area. Your tax-deductible donation will be kept locally and applied to priority projects. Please visit sierrastateparks.org to see how you can get involved and access a full list of upcoming events. With me today are Lisa Wallace and Sue Drake. Lisa is the Executive Director at the Truckee River Watershed Council. Prior to this position, she worked for several nonprofits that also focus on habitat restoration. On a personal note, in the 1990s, Lisa fulfilled a lifelong dream and sailed a good part of the way around the world. Very impressive. Lisa moved to Truckee in 1999. She enjoys skiing, boating, biking, and hiking and all things Truckee River. Big surprise. Sue Drake is the Development Director of the Truckee River Watershed Council, or what I'm going to call the TRWC. Prior to working on protecting the Truckee River, Drake worked in ski resort management, outdoor education, and as an environmental consultant and biologist focused on water quality and wildlife protection in the Western states. Drake has a BS degree in biological sciences from University of Montana, Missoula. She loves hiking, running, skiing, and spending time in nature. The Truckee River Watershed Council's goal is to restore the resiliency of our environment so nature and humanity can thrive together for generations. TRWC brings the community together for the Truckee to protect, enhance, and restore the Truckee River Watershed. In this Sierra Speaker Series, Lisa and Sue will talk about the Truckee River Watershed and the Council's efforts to protect, enhance, and restore our unique and vibrant watershed. I'll now pass it over to Lisa and Sue. Welcome and thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. We're really excited to join everybody for this part of the Sierra Speaker Series. Yeah, and I just wanted to add my thanks to Jeremy's and to the foundation and thank all of you for spending a little bit of time with us this evening. And I really hope, because we're still in this period of the pandemic, that everybody who's on the call with us today is doing well. At the Watershed Council, we have been in the fortunate position over the last year to be able to continue our habitat restoration work. We feel that that's really important for the sake of the environment itself to preserve and protect, but also to give people healthy, functioning ecosystems and places to be outdoors for their recreation. Another reason we're feeling grateful to be able to continue our work during the course of this past year of the pandemic is, of course, the climate crisis has not stopped. It didn't really care about the pandemic. And all of the work that we're doing directly provides a local response for adaptation and mitigation against the climate crisis. So we're grateful to be able to help the community and help our ecosystems. So with that little bit of the pandemic check-in, let's get started with our river talk. Sometimes people ask me, why did I join the Truckee River Watershed Council? And I like to tell the story about when I was 7 years old and my family took our first ever camping trip. We came to Donner Lake. We camped for a week and we didn't get back in the car the entire time. And when it was time to leave, I can say that I was really crushed. I had connected so deeply with this part of the Sierra Nevada. My dad was great. He came down to get me into the car and he was like, you know, I know, honey, I know how that is. It feels like we're really meant to be here. And that week, camping at the park was really a formative experience for my entire life. Eventually, in the late 90s, when I moved to Truckee, I already had this connection and it felt like home. But I did really feel that I was in the right place for that phase of my life, this phase of my life, when I met the founders of the Truckee River Watershed Council. I was really affected by this small group of people here in the Eastern Sierra doing this really large job of trying to restore the river. They were successful. They were having a lot of good progress, and I was hooked and fortunate enough to be able to come to work for them. So the mission of the Truckee River Watershed Council, we bring the community together for the Truckee to protect, enhance, and restore the Truckee River watershed. And a watershed is one landscape where the precipitation falls and it flows to the river. This creates habitat and provides water for wildlife and people. The mission of the Truckee River Watershed Council is to bring the community together for the Truckee to protect, enhance, and restore the Truckee River watershed. And a watershed is a landscape, one landscape, where precipitation falls and it flows to the main river. This creates habitat and provides water for wildlife and for people. Why does our work matter? Well, the Truckee River and all its tributaries are listed as polluted for excessive erosion, and we have this listing by the state of California and by the federal EPA. The sedimentation damages water quality and wildlife habitat, but we don't have to accept this pollution. And the Watershed Council, since 1996, has been able to do a lot of things to address this type of erosion and damage. In our project work, we've completed many large-scale restoration projects, restoring thousands of acres of forest and meadow habitat and tens of miles of stream. In our people work, thousands of volunteers have joined us to complete many, many projects each year on Truckee River Day. And in our policy work, we do a lot of work to get the right levels of stream flows, for example, for fish habitat. All of our work has improved water quality and wildlife habitat. And from these successes, we have set a long-term goal to complete another 50 large-scale restoration projects. We need to be able to complete 5 large projects a year in our local forests, meadows, and streams. If we don't do this work, our watershed will continue to decline because we won't be keeping up with the rate of habitat loss that's already occurring. There's a lot of work to be done so that our watershed is healthy enough to adapt and thrive in the face of climate change. You know, we've seen how climate change is triggering in other places, floods, wildfire, and drought. And of course, we don't want that to be happening here in the Truckee River watershed. I often wonder when I think about kids, what are going to be their deep memories from last summer in the pandemic and this summer as hopefully the pandemic is ending. And I'm really hopeful that there can be another dad with his young kid who is out on the Truckee River, or maybe even in one of the places that we've restored. And then in spite of the experiences of the pandemic, that kid will have the opportunity to be transformed in the same way that I was. Yeah. Well, with that little bit of an introduction, Sue, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Lisa. So a little bit about myself as well and how I wound up here at the Truckee River Watershed Council. I've lived in a few different states across the country. Starting in New York as a kid, I grew up by the Hudson River, and there was a lot of pollution from General Electric plants just north of New York City along the Hudson River that was leaching chemicals downstream. And when I moved to Montana, there was the Clark Fork River that I lived nearby, and there was mining waste coming down the Clark Fork River backing up against a small dam just out east of Missoula. And they were always trying to figure out what to do with that, dredge it, leave it in, what can the community possibly do? And then when I was in Portland, Oregon, I lived very close to the Columbia River. And along the Columbia River was the Bonneville Dam, and they struggled with fish passage along the Columbia River. And then finally, when I moved to Truckee, I met Lisa and some of the staff here at the Watershed Council, and I was surprised to learn that the Truckee River is polluted with sediment, and that was surprising to me. And in each of these communities, there's a small group of people that are really helpful in protecting the river. And for me, I take a lot of inspiration around the efforts that we put in here locally to protect the river. So very happy to be part of the solution here in Truckee. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour around our work. So we have a few areas of impact that we're going to go over with you. So the first one is our project work. And let's see here. We also work with people and policy. So the first one we're going to go over is work in our project area. So this is a photo of the Mardis Valley. Some of you might be familiar that live here with the Mardis Valley. You have North Star to the lower right-hand corner, and then Truckee to the far left. And with this photo, this is one of our projects, and a lot of people think that forests and meadows and streams are just too damaged to recover. But just in the last 3 years, the Watershed Council has restored over 700 acres of degraded meadow and 5 miles of stream bank. And this is one of the projects that Lisa is going to explain to us.
Well, I'm going to start off by taking us back a little bit of a point in time in our imaginations. If you could imagine and think about maybe what it would have been like to be born in the Mardis Valley 70 years ago. We actually have a friend and supporter of the Watershed Council named Stephanie, and that is the case. She was born in the Mardis Valley near, at the time, it was the Yorger Ranch. She was telling me a little while ago about what that experience was like. I'm actually going to read a couple of quotes from her. I did an interview with her. And when she was remembering about her teenage years in the Mardis Valley, she said to me that many, many summer days I would ride out on my horse. I would take fishing gear with me and a bedroll. I would ride out into the meadows in Mardis Valley, and I would spend the day immersed in tall grasses, drinking from the streams and the springs, listening to the songs of the birds and that whirring of the insects. You might think, Stephanie said to me, you might think that meadows are just pretty, but they're a lot more than that, and they support our life in very important ways. And, when I was talking to her at this point, she was saddened by some of the things that happened in Mardis Valley. And she said that year after year, I saw the meadows retreat, leaving behind sagebrush and degraded, eroding trees. The springs were drying up, and the birds and the fish were greatly diminishing in number because their habitat was gone. She, in her own career, did become an activist working to protect the environment, but she wasn't able to work in her home place in Mardis Valley. So when we started working with her and the other landowners in Mardis Valley, she said to me, that was a point when you guys, the Watershed Council, when you were bringing together the landowners to restore the meadows and the forests, I saw a glimmer of hope, especially when after 5 years of that hard partnership building, the Watershed Council was able to start to reconnect the historic but dried out Mardis Creek with its original stream course. And Sue's bringing that photo up here. So the original stream course of Mardis Valley is to the east and north of Highway 267. And you can see all the gray parts of this meadow area here. That is the sagebrush that Stephanie was talking about, where sagebrush had taken over what should be lush meadow and sedges. So when I was able to actually take her out to the restoration site, she was able to see where we had directed the flows back to their original stream channels. Sorry, Sue's going to bring up a photo for us of that construction when we were in construction with the project. So this is where we're putting Middle Mardis Creek back on its original stream course, and we were directing the flows back into its original channel from where it had been diverted. And Stephanie was able to see where we started pulling out sagebrush. I'll just interrupt myself for a minute here and say, we like sagebrush where it belongs, but what belongs here, and you can see where they've been planted, are these native meadow grasses and sedges. And then next spring, after the project had been implemented, I was able to take her out in the spring snow melt, and we were able to see Middle Mardis Creek on its original stream course, flowing flowing as a creek where it hadn't flowed for over 150 years. She was grateful and said that she said, it gives me great hope that in my lifetime, I'll be able to see the meadows all over Mardis Valley greening up and alive again.
Thanks, Lisa. So restoring Middle Mardis Creek and its meadow is a great accomplishment, but we also have 8 more of these large-scale projects in meadows that need our immediate attention. And each project requires building a partnership, planning, permitting, fundraising, and engineering design before dirt can even be moved or vegetation planted. And we need project managers, and for every project manager, we can take on about 1 to 3 projects a season. So now we'll move on to our next area of impact, which is people. And so some of you may be familiar with Truckee River Day. So most people think that one person can't make a difference, but we have over 500 volunteers that have worked on Truckee River Day, planting hundreds of native trees, enhancing fish habitat, and building trails, and pulling invasive weeds that will allow native plants to thrive. So you're going to hear a story from an earth science professor. This is Frank on your screen here. He's an earth science professor, and he brought his students to Truckee River Day, and he wanted to share that experience with you.
So I'm Frank DeCourton. I'm professor of earth science at Sierra College. Been here 14 years. When I went to Truckee as the dean of our new Truckee campus, one of the things that was expected, of course, is that you would get active in the community to assess the educational needs of a small Sierra town. And what I discovered in meeting with private citizens and friends and colleagues and organizations of various types is that the conservation ethic runs really deep with folks who live in the Sierra and make a living in those towns. And it's a little bit different an ethic from those who feel compelled to protect and preserve the Sierra from a distance. For example, conservation groups in San Francisco also value the Sierra, but those who work in it and live in it have a little bit different perspective. It's more of a hands-on, grassroots kind of effort. Because of that, there's a number of organizations within the Truckee area that actually sponsor activities. And I'll give you one example. Truckee River Days occurs every October. It's organized under the auspices of the Truckee River Watershed Council. And I've done it for 4 years now, volunteered to participate in the activities. It's a wonderful festival of the Sierra Nevada is what it is. 500 people roughly volunteer, most of them from the Truckee community, a few from outside, and they design projects that everybody can participate in. There's usually 12, 15 or so different projects, and all of those activities occur simultaneously on one day in October. We have elderly folks who come out, teachers, their students, we have policemen, we have utility line workers, we have all kinds of people show up, all united by that same goal, and that's to do something positive to preserve the Mardis Valley and the Truckee watershed landscape. Nobody gets paid for this. Nobody's status in life is benefited by it, but they do it because they believe in the future of their town. I just love the local hands-on stuff. I love getting dirty with the kids and jumping in the creeks with them to count bugs under rocks. That kind of stuff is really fun. To me, that's more rewarding than anything else I could be doing.
Great. So that was Frank and Truckee and a description of Truckee River Day, and we need to train 20 more group leaders for Truckee River Day in 2021, and more group leaders will ensure volunteers like Frank's students can take part in making sure we all have clean water and healthy meadows and forests. So I'm going to take you on a tour of our next area of impact, which is our policy. And most people think that water in the Truckee River belongs to all of us in California. But the fact is that the water in the Truckee River is actually owned largely by municipalities and agricultural districts in Nevada. And they're not necessarily compelled to prioritize the environmental effects of how and when they take their water. So this is Kathleen Egan. Some of you may know her as the first mayor of Truckee. And she recognized this. When we asked her to help tell about our policy work, she sent us this letter that I'm going to read. Dear Truckee River Watershed Council, my husband Jim and I share a passion for fishing. And we particularly love fishing rivers and streams. It's one of the reasons we moved to Truckee in the mid-'80s. Our fishing experiences made us fully aware that poorly timed releases of water from dams can seriously degrade stream and riparian habitats, making it hard for fish to survive. So years ago, when I learned negotiations were taking place that would establish how releases from the dams in our region would be managed, I got involved. From the very first negotiating sessions in the mid-1990s, I was shocked to realize that no one was officially involved was even considering the implications of dam operations on our local rivers, streams, and reservoir levels. Here's one example. In May 1994, downstream water rights holders were able to authorize the release of thousands of acre-feet of water out of Stampede Dam. They wanted that water to help a spawning run of kwee fish in the Truckee River near Pyramid Lake. That water was released from Stampede and sent to Pyramid Lake as if Stampede Dam was a spigot and the Truckee River was a water pipe. When the spawning run at Pyramid Lake was finished, the flows from Stampede Dam were suddenly shut off. So while the fish in Pyramid Lake were fine, fish up here in California in the river below Stampede were stranded in isolated pools. Local volunteers saved many, but not all the fish. This situation is repeated several times since 1994. Each time, many fish are stranded. We have the sense that it's all protected. I was crushed to realize that it's not, and that without someone negotiating every month, the health of the watershed and our river were at stake. So we formed a group, which eventually became the Truckee River Watershed Council, and we took an active role in negotiating how the dams would be operated. I remember vividly how difficult it was to have our interest heard by negotiators. We had to understand the biological needs of the fish, the legality of the water rights, and ways to simultaneously satisfy water rights and the need of our watershed. Slowly, the Watershed Council began building opportunities into the operations to minimize damage to fish and improve the condition of the watershed. It seemed there was reason for hope that things could change from spigot and pipe to more natural stream flow. However, while the Watershed Council negotiates for better flows out of Stampede and Boca dams, we still struggle to get the right flows out of Independence, Prosser, Donner, and Tahoe dams. We can and need to get the flows right in the right amounts to protect fish spawning, rearing, and overwintering habitat. The right flows support macroinvertebrates, the water bugs, the food that the fish eat. The right flows also mean reservoir levels are right for summer boating and river rafting. Knowing the Watershed Council is laser focused on this policy work keeps my hope alive that we will be able to better protect our fisheries, lakes, rivers, and streams. Sincerely, Kathleen Egan. So we're very proud to have helped Kathleen and others who care so deeply about the health of our watershed. And we need to control enough water to protect fish and habitat. We need about 2,000 acre feet of water to be able to regulate flows in our part of the Truckee River. And water rights can cost as much as $20,000 an acre foot. So I want to thank you for your attention today. And we just have one more person who wanted to share her story, how the Truckee River Watershed Council has touched her life before we wrap up here. And please listen as Jackie Zink tells her story.
I was born a city girl. My first experience in the wild was a camping trip to Joshua Tree with Campfire Girls. I was hooked. I became inspired to save the planet. I eventually escaped the city and ended up in Truckee. I used to walk my dogs in Mardis Valley, and I would look at that view of the Sierra Crest from the valley and be so grateful to have this gorgeous valley to walk in. It's one of the most spectacular views in our area. Ironically, I ended up becoming the park ranger for Mardis Creek Lake. I was now the caretaker of this beautiful valley. As I explored my valley, I observed that Mardis Valley was suffering from poor resource management practices over the past 100 years. Cattle grazing, rechanneling of the creek, road building, dam building, cattle trails, and social trails all resulted in a meadow that was really impaired. One day I noticed that a heavy spring runoff was washing out the trail and sending too much water down a small channel. I investigated upstream and found that the natural flow pattern had been channeled to one side of the highway when 267 was constructed in 1948. What used to be an alluvial fan spreading across the upper end of the valley and watering the entire meadow was now a narrow channel, sending all the water to one area. I realized we had a big problem. The water had been rechanneled so severely that flows were causing erosion on one side of the highway and had dewatered the meadow on the other side. The meadow was dysfunctional. From then on, my mission was the restoration of Mardis Valley. The we was myself and the Army Corps of Engineers. Fortunately for the Corps of Engineers, I came to the job with a formidable ally, the Truckee River Watershed Council. The Corps partnered with the Truckee River Watershed Council to accomplish Truckee River Day projects in Mardis Valley. But TRWC also works on a large scale. I asked if we could do a watershed assessment of the valley. The assessment identified degraded conditions in Mardis Valley, and one of the many things revealed was that the alluvial fan that used to channel water through the valley needed to be restored to solve the flooding issues and have a functioning meadow. Stakeholders got together and planned and constructed an alluvial fan, reconnecting the dewatered meadow to its historic water source, Middle Mardis Creek. The amount of water now being absorbed by the meadow is increasing, and that part of the meadow is slowly healing. The trail no longer washes out in the spring runoff. With that project under our belt, we turned our attention to the other side of 267, the Mardis Creek wildlife area. The flows in main Mardis Creek were too much for the altered channel. The channel was severely eroded, incised, and draining the meadow. That might have been the end of my story, but with the help of the Watershed Council, Mardis Valley has become my legacy. I retired from the Corps of Engineers after 30 years of federal service, but I've built a strong relationship between the Corps and the Truckee River Watershed Council, and there's a multitude of restoration opportunities in Mardis Valley. I started the project, others will finish it. I am thrilled to see a healthy, verdant meadow in the future. I feel a little better leaving my valley because Mardis is in the hands of the Truckee River Watershed Council. I can't save the planet, but I have helped to save my small piece of it. Truckee River Watershed Council truly is an amazing organization.
I'm Frank DeCourton.
Sorry. Great, thank you. We want to thank you for your attention today and sharing this time with us, and feel free to contact us here for more information. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy.
Beautiful. What a great presentation. I learned so much. I'm really excited to join the Truckee River Days. So I'll be out there. Yeah, let's make that happen. Okay, great. Well, this concludes our episode of the Sierra Speaker Series with Lisa Wallace and Sue Drake. Lisa Wallace is the Executive Director at the Truckee River Watershed Council, and Sue Drake is the Development Director. Truckee River Watershed Council's goal is to restore the resiliency of the environment so nature and humanity can thrive together for generations. TRWC brings the community together for the Truckee to protect, enhance, and restore the Truckee River watershed. Please visit truckeeriverwc.org for more information and we'll include a link in the description. This interview is brought to you by California State Parks and the Sierra State Parks Foundation. Please donate to the Sierra State Parks Foundation today to support the interpretation, restoration, and preservation of the park system in the Lake Tahoe Donner area. Your tax-deductible donation will be kept locally and applied to priority projects. Please visit sierrastateparks.org to see how you can get involved and access a full list of upcoming events. Feel free to contact me, California State Park Interpreter Jeremy Lin at Donner Memorial State Park. And I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you all so much for attending, and we'll see you next time. Bye.